Matt Whitaker, former U.S. Acting Attorney General.
This is such a great conversation about America, our future, what's going to save our republic.
We have a great football player. Matt Whitaker is here. Matt.
They tried to bury me. They didn't realize I was a seed.
It's a touchdown. Whitaker.
Former acting U.S. Attorney General.
Under President Trump.
I'm going to be an unwavering supporter of law enforcement.
Welcome to Liberty and Justice with your host, Matt Whitaker.
Today's episode is sponsored by Save Missouri Values PAC. Welcome to Liberty and Justice. I'm your host, Matt Whitaker. Remember, everything we're doing premieres Friday, 7 p.m. on CPAC Now, and then you can go to whitaker.tv or anywhere podcasts are distributed to find Liberty and Justice. And, of course, sign up for our newsletter at whitaker.tv. I'm joined today by my friend John Ratcliffe. John, how are you?
I'm doing great, Matt. It's great to be with you. It's great to see you again. And good to see you doing so well. Podcast, TV, seems like you're everywhere. So congrats on the success.
Well, you know what they say is when people start recognizing that you're out there doing something, you might have finally broken through after all the hard work. I like to say I was an overnight sensation 10 years in the making. But, John, let's get into it. You're the former U.S. attorney. You and I were U.S. attorneys in the Bush administration. You then were a member of Congress and ultimately became President Trump's director of national intelligence. There's a lot of directions we can go. I want to start just generally with national affairs, and then we'll go to the international affairs. But, you know, right now it seems like our major cities are melting down, chaos, anarchy. You know, gun crimes on the rise, murders on the rise. I mean, really, major cities are under the wheel right now of a dramatic spike in crime. What do you see as the causes, and then, you know, what do you think Americans can hope can be accomplished by their leaders to ultimately reduce violent crime in America?
Right. Well, I think, you know, the biggest problem has been a concerted effort by Democrats to put progressive Democrat socialists in, you know, what are probably the most important positions in the country, which are, you know, district attorneys. I mean, you and I were U.S. attorneys at the federal level with federal districts, but only had federal jurisdiction. You know, I say this all the time, the person that has the most ability to influence your life on a daily basis is your local district attorney, because, you know, they decide what cases are brought and what cases are not brought in terms of appearing before grand juries. And as you've seen in, you know, from coast to coast, from New York to Los Angeles, and in democratically controlled important counties in between across America, you have these progressive socialist, radical Democrats that have refused to enforce the rule of law. And so what we saw was the burning of our cities and even our legal courthouses, you know, 2 summers ago. And this sort of selective enforcement about when the law is going to be important, when it's not, is a dangerous precedent that we're all living now. And so, you know, people that are allowed to go in and just in broad daylight without even wearing masks, steal hundreds, if not thousands of dollars from, you know, from retailers and not be prosecuted because Democratic, you know, leadership says, well, the system's been biased against those folks for too long, so we're not going to prosecute that. You know, that has just led to, again, you know, as you know, Matt, the rule of law is there. You know, it's you know, a blindfolded lady administering justice, you know, without regard to race, color, or religion, and we've gotten away from that, where it's now been selectively enforced and politicized, and the country has spiraled into a crime wave because of it. And I think until that changes, and fortunately, I would say the one positive thing is when you see a progressive like Chesa Boudin in San Francisco run out of town, it underscores how bad things really have gotten for a jurisdiction like that to say, wow, it's gone even too far for us in a place that's populated by a liberal community. You know, and but I think America's paid attention to that, and I think that's a trend that hopefully will continue and put us back on the right path. Are you there, Matt?
Yeah, I'm there. I'm sorry. It just we got a little bit of a lag. The good thing is that since it's uploading on both sides, no matter how poor our quality is right now, ultimately what people are watching is going to be high quality. So I'll jump. Another question is: have you noticed, especially when you and I were U.S. attorneys and we had Project Safe Neighborhoods where we would take gun crimes federally? That certainly made a big difference in getting some of the trigger pullers and violent criminals off the streets. I was noticing that New York City, who has one of those progressive prosecutors, has declined or dismissed 80% of the gun crimes that the police have brought to them. I think that's a real concerning statistic, especially when the Biden administration, U.S. attorneys, I'm sure, are not taking those gun crimes that aren't being prosecuted locally.
Yeah, so I think it's a combination there, Matt. You and I lived the success of Project Safe Neighborhood. In fact, it spawned other, related projects because it was so successful. Project Safe Neighborhood became Project Safe Childhood, and really approach on some of those simple things. And you talk about New York City. Back when Mayor Giuliani was there and the broken windows, approach. Those were simple things that worked, and so. One of the things, the overlay against not enforcing, good laws that were proven statistically to be effective, layered upon that with this defund the police mentality and approach, again, particularly in progressive cities, it's been hard to get, it's been hard to keep our law enforcement community motivated and staffed, and that has also contributed to this, surge in crime waves across the country. And unfortunately, that's something that's going to have to be reversed. Is people are going to have to be believe that public service as a law enforcement official and peace officer is something that the community is going to respect again and support again. And right now, they haven't had that across the board.
Yeah, they haven't. As director of national intelligence, you had a bird's eye view into a lot of things. The ascendancy of China and all the things that they're trying to accomplish and are doing to our country. You had obviously a view of not only Russia but all of Europe and in the security situation there. You had obviously a hand in releasing and declassifying a lot of documents as it related to the Russian collusion fable, and I'm sure you've been watching this January 6th thing. You talk about kind of the two-tiered system of justice. I think that's a prime example. But I want to talk about the international, kind of strategic situation. Russia has invaded Ukraine. Would not have happened if Trump were still president. China is obviously expanding their influence around not only their region but really internationally. I think why don't we start with your kind of thoughts on China, its ascendancy, kind of its next possible moves, and then we'll circle back on the Russia-Ukraine situation, and if there's any lessons learned, I'd love to hear that from you.
Yeah. So the China problem has been one that's been, really 2 decades in the making. And so it's been both Republican and Democratic administrations since 2000 that sort of ignored what China was doing. And part of that was our own, what we wanted to see and what we thought was, look, if China is an ally and we treat them as an ally and we show them how democracy works, that they will embrace it. If we share our technology with them, if we share the best, scientists and engineers, and they will work with us and be both a peace-loving and law-respecting society. And obviously, that's not been the case. In fact, just the opposite has happened. They've used that to their advantage in an autocratic way to repress their own people and to spread their influence around the world. But Donald Trump and the Trump administration was really the first one to say this has gotten out of hand. And so everything from, economically, trade imbalances to militarily, how China was closing the gap on us and why we needed to reinforce our military was really a focus. And that's why, there was a lot of clashing, between, and people took what we were doing in the administration as anti-China. It was really, we were just trying to level the playing field to how things had been off kilter for so long. And we were effective in doing that. And I think one of the things that I lament the most is this change in attitude from the Biden administration, even in the face of continued Chinese aggression. The best example I can give to this, Matt, is within the last 2 weeks, even the World Health Organization, which was complicit in covering up for China in the COVID-19 pandemic that killed 7 million people worldwide, including 1 million Americans. Even the World Health Organization last week said, you know what, we need to investigate this because now we believe that the most likely cause of this pandemic was a lab leak at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, something China lied about. And you'd think in the face of that our language with respect to China would be more aggressive and that we'd want more accountability. But instead, what you saw at the very same time that was happening, you saw China issuing threats to us, saying, if you interfere with what we're trying to do in Taiwan, we will put you on a, quote, path to death, and we will, quote, smash you to smithereens. And the Biden administration response to that, highly insulting rhetoric, talking to our top diplomats that way, Secretary of Defense Austin on a visit there, was to say, the White House saying, we think we should ease sanctions on China moving forward. So it's always the path of appeasement. And, and it's not just China, we can go around but this is just this continuous sign of weakness that this administration is showing that wasn't there the last 4 years. And as a result, the sort of the measures that were in place, the roadblocks that prevented the aggression that's now happening everywhere around the world, that didn't happen in the Trump administration, we're now seeing it. Pick a place on the globe, take me there, and I'll tell you how we're worse off. The world is worse off. America's national security posture is weakened, and it's because of this same mentality that we've taken with regard to appeasing our adversaries instead of confronting them, deterring them with strong actions. And as much damage has been done in the last 18 months in this administration, my biggest fear, Matt, is what's going to happen for the next 30 months, because the same team that is driving us into the ditch is going to be making these decisions going forward.
Yeah, and as you know, ultimately, if the Republicans do take Congress and or the Senate in 22, this administration will probably be so much oversight. They'll be spending a lot of time doing oversight, as unfortunately we did in the second half of the Trump administration. But I want to get your perspective on Russia's invasion into Ukraine. Clearly, it's been a two-part. First, they tried to just dismantle the government, hit Kyiv, take control of the entire country, and I think now they've strategically repurposed. Is there ever going to be an end to the Ukrainians' fight? I mean, they appear to be willing to defend their country with everything they have, and we're pouring a ton of resources into it. But does it end? And if so, how, predict the future for me. How does it end?
Yeah. I'm not optimistic, Matt, that this is going to be this is going to end well for Ukrainian democracy. So let's start where what's important to look at this is where did this come from? And really, if you trace the problems that we're having with Russia, with China, with Iran right now, it all goes back to Afghanistan. And at the time, many of us said, in the face not just of a withdrawal, but of a defeat, of a retreat, of a surrender, the kind of a surrender that allowed, even as the Biden administration is backing out the door, 13 Americans are killed, at the Abbey Gate, and Afghans are falling off the wings of C-17s or being ground up in the wheel well. It was that feckless withdrawal and retreat that really said to the rest of the world, primarily to our adversaries, boy, things are changed. Donald Trump is not the president anymore. And so we all, you, me, everyone else, thought they're going to test us. They're going to see, gosh, if the United States gets punched in the mouth, are they going to punch back? And the first example of that is Putin and Russia and Ukraine. So, Vladimir Putin, has always wanted to reunify Ukraine into the Soviet, the old Soviet sphere of influence, which is why he took that first step in taking Crimea when Joe Biden was last in the White House. And are we to believe that Vladimir Putin suddenly lost his appetite for the 4 years of the Trump administration? No, he didn't move further because Donald Trump and the Trump administration established that there was a deterrent effect, that he would pay a price that he was not willing to pay. And so it started, months into the Biden administration that you saw this buildup of troops in the Donbass. So that's why we're in that situation, not just in Russia, but if you look at the aggression around the world, it really started in Afghanistan. But here's what concerns me about where we are in Ukraine. There's a difference, Matt, between helping Ukraine and helping Ukraine win. And the Biden administration from the beginning was never about helping Ukraine win. Here's the best example I can give you of this. Putin's invasion started on February 24th. On February 26th, what did Joe Biden and the Biden administration encourage Volodymyr Zelensky to do? Leave town. To do exactly what they had done in Afghanistan. They offered him a ride, to which he famously said, "I don't need a ride, I need ammunition." So that would have given Vladimir Putin a quick victory without a Ukrainian president staying in his own country. To his credit and the Ukrainian people, and to your point, they're willing to fight. They've showed that they will give their lives. The problem is that was just the beginning of it for a reluctant Biden administration that has been slow to respond. Even in the last 2 weeks, what you've seen is, well, we're sending these, our HIMARS, our, high mobility artillery rocket systems to help Ukraine. Matt, we sent 4 HIMARS. They asked for 40. I mean, it's this continually slow and insufficient response. And I think as a result, what you've seen is Vladimir Putin knows that. He's playing the long game. He's playing the game of attrition. And as a result, Joe Biden stood up there and tried to take credit for, Europe is unified, NATO is unified, we're all on the same page. And that was true in the beginning, but the way this works is, public support creates public pressure, which brings about, the invocation of sanctions. But the opposite is true. And now this is what you're starting to see, Matt, is there's a lack of public interest in this. Yeah. Which means there's a lack of public pressure, which means the sanctions are going to fall away, and you've already started to see some of this fracturing. And so, Vladimir Putin, is grinding it out, and people say, well, gosh, they've lost so many troops. One of the things that I learned, Matt, in reading intelligence reports as the DNI, is you learn a very scary fact, which is, our leaders lament the loss of, 13 Americans at the Abbey Gate. Vladimir Putin doesn't care if he loses 30,000 soldiers or 300,000 soldiers. His mindset is, they're cannon fodder. There's always more as long as I get what I want. And so that's the approach he's taking. So I don't like how this is trending. And I also don't like that the impact that this is going to have, if this ultimately ends up with a Ukrainian defeat or the Russians picking up territory, which they very clearly have. I don't like the impact that's going to have with regard to China, because if I'm President Xi, what I'm looking at is I'm saying, if the European community and the West can't stand up and succeed against the 15th largest economy in the world, if that's too painful, if they can't stand the cost of all of this, what are they going to do against us, the second largest economy, fast closing on the largest economy? And so I think it emboldens him to think, maybe now's as good a time as any to move on Taiwan, and that's my fear over the next 30 months is that he'll see that if this is unsuccessful because of the approach that the Biden administration has taken, it is just going to engender future aggression from other adversaries around the globe.
Yeah, one of the things that just crossed my mind as you were explaining so importantly what's happening between Russia and Ukraine and how Vladimir Putin is thinking is I noticed over the weekend, last weekend, as always happens in Washington, D.C., a leak of intelligence with an estimation that, essentially Russia is going to kind of run out of steam in their war effort, and they're going to have to retool and renew some of the fighting units that are in this. As DNI and as Attorney General, when I was there, I was so frustrated by leaks, especially intelligence leaks. We investigated them. We tried to prove the cases that we could. Oftentimes it's too distributed. The intelligence is too widely distributed to actually get to sort of who had access to it and therefore who leaked it. How are Americans that read news reports of intelligence leaks supposed to handle that information? Do you have a best advice? If you read it, then it's true. If you read it, you got to understand sort of what the evaluation is, since intelligence is more of an art than a science. I'd love your perspective as a former DNI.
Well, unfortunately, you can't just accept it as true, because we've seen that many of these leaks, are not true. And really, when I hear about a leak, unfortunately, and this is the opposite of what you should be thinking, I think, what's the political motivation here? And that will really tell me whether or not the information is reliable. So let me give you, an example. When I was DNI, one of the things that quote unquote leaked out of the intelligence community was that there was Russian bounties on American soldiers, and that Donald Trump, because he was an ally of Russia or Putin's puppet, was unwilling to do anything about that. Well, the simple truth is, Matt, there were no Russian bounties. And so when I talked to the New York Times editor and said, this is simply not true, you can't report this, and he said, well, we have sources that tell us this is true. And I responded, excuse me, I am the source. I'm the head of the intelligence community, and I'm telling you it's not true. But they printed it anyway. And as you know, it consumed the American public, conscience for a while, because it was so outrageous. Well, fast forward into 3 months into the Biden administration, and then finally there's this acknowledgement that, that whole thing about Russian bounties, there was nothing to that. It turns out that wasn't accurate. But it drove a political narrative that they wanted, which was that Donald Trump was sympathetic to Russia and unwilling to stand up to them. And it was simply not true. And so you see it both ways. And so, when I hear that, to the point that you just made over the weekend about Russia's running out of steam, is, again, this is a leak that I don't find credible, because at the same time, if you're moving flags on the board, what you see are more Russian flags are moving forward and Ukrainian flags are moving back. He's increasing his territory. So to me, that quote unquote leak of information, that Russia's hanging by a thread, is really to try and make people feel better about the investment that the West is making and that the progress that they're making in standing up to Putin. When, again, to your first question, I think this is a war of attrition that's going to go on, and the long game benefits Vladimir Putin. He's done this before. He's been successful in other places before. And unless and until, the West says, you know what, Ukraine may not be a NATO country, but we're going to treat them as such, and we're getting more involved, then, I think that this favors Russia in the end, and I don't believe that intelligence.
Yeah. So also the G7 meeting, what do you think was helpful that they took off their jackets, rolled up their sleeves, took off their ties, and then were overheard, essentially making insults to Vladimir Putin? I don't sense that Putin is the kind of guy that likes to be mocked by the, sort of white wine drinking, brie tasting G7 leaders.
It's funny you say that, Matt, because I thought the same thing as I watched this, and I thought how things had changed when President Trump used to go to those things, and they were not nearly as collegial because he was calling out the things that that the group had or had not done, and in the past. And I mean, I got to tell you, the picture that you just described of these guys walking out did not inspire confidence in me. When you sit there and think these are the leaders of the of the democratic countries of the world, and I thought Donald Trump was conspicuous by his absence, and the idea that there was a strong leader who would stand up to President Xi and Vladimir Putin and others. And yeah, I think it's absolutely the wrong approach for a group that does not have any success to point to, in connection with this issue moving forward. And that gets back to the point where leadership has consequences, but the most important leader in the country is always the leader of the United States of America. And the fact that Joe Biden is the guy going over there, the idea that those countries are going to either rally behind him or be, in the case of Donald Trump, often uncomfortably moved to do the things that were necessary to do because he was willing to call them out. That's just not happening now. And they're all patting themselves on the back, for a job not well done.
Yeah. Well, John, you have had a exemplary career in public service. I've been able to sort of watch and cheer on some of the things you've done, including when we were U.S. attorneys, and when you were in Congress. Obviously, you led a lot of fights in that regard, and then as DNI, I mean, you did so much. So, there's several other things I would love to talk about. We're out of time. How can people follow what you're doing, and why don't you just talk briefly about what you are doing?
Well, you're very kind, Matt, and I don't want to be mutual admiration society, but it's working with folks like you. You and I did before the Trump administration, and then together, throughout the course of that, and even now, the chance to work together. I think one of the things that you and I share, is this concern going forward about America's national security posture, and your approach, and you're talking about these things and bringing, trying to educate the American public about what's really going on, and talking to folks like me to get to the truth. Because, I was in a very fortunate position to have more access to more intelligence than anyone else in the country for a period of time. And that's a pretty sobering thing. And is what makes it so troubling to watch all of these unnecessary things that are happening around the world, where the United States loses in Afghanistan, where the United States is losing, in terms of its support, I think right now in this war in Ukraine, where our diplomats are being pushed around by China's diplomats, where we went from, an Iranian terrorist regime hanging by a thread to where we are now, which is the Biden administration begging, pleading, and literally willing to write a blank check to a terrorist regime to try and get them, to enter some failed, nuclear agreement that the Iranians will never honor. All of these things are unnecessary, but more importantly, they're damaging to our national security posture. So, as I'm out of, obviously, government service for the time being, my focus is in the private sector, sort of taking advantage of the access, the things that I have had, and where national security, intelligence, and technology meet, trying to help companies that can improve our national security posture, either as a board member or as an advisor or as a consultant, because this is really the long game. This is where America will win, and I know what's at stake, and we need to hold out and try and minimize the damage that's happening in this administration until there's strong American leadership to lead the world again, and then who knows, maybe you and I will return to support that in an official capacity, because I think that's that's what the greatness of America is about, is giving more of yourself than you think you can, I know you've done that before, Matt, and I've tried to do that. And again, I hope that we have an opportunity to make sure that America is the world superpower, for the rest of our lifetimes.
All right. Well, John, thank you for being with me. You are an American patriot, and you're also an excellent golfer, and we'll have to do that again sometime soon. I want to thank John Ratcliffe for being my guest here on Liberty and Justice. Remember, sign up for our newsletter at whitaker.tv, where you can see all of our episodes. This episode will premiere Friday night, 7 p.m. on CPAC Now. John, thank you.
You bet.